Hello, I'm Jose, and this week I will be answering question 3, which reads, what did you learn about the anti-federalist argument against the presidency? Are recent events evidence that the anti-federalists were correct? Why or why not? The main argument that the anti-federalists had against a president or a presidency, or at least as it was known in their moment of creation, a a chief executive, was this fear of a tyranny, and it was justified because of their recent revolution or their ongoing revolution um, with England. And during this time in which these ideals of freedom and state independence were valued over a central democracy, which could at any point turn against its citizens, they created the Articles of Confederation. And what this valued was, as previously stated, a strong state independence, that each state could govern themselves freely uh, of the rules that governed any other state. And while this did fulfill their need for a a independent union, it, however, created many uh, economic issues. Many of them were because of this limited central power. The Congress could not, the Congress that was in power could not collect taxes, so there was no power behind taxation. There was no assembly of army, so there was no protection. The debts that the United States had acquired because of the war were not being paid because the currency was being devalued, and as a result, the economy was crippling this very young nation that would become the United States. And to a certain degree, which we learned in class, it allowed for a mob rule. So while the anti-federalists' argument against democracy in theory is correct, that there should be a limit to the central power, and this idea was carried throughout the Constitutional Convention, it those Articles of Confederation and that ideal almost became the very undoing of the United States in its very early years. It was almost like a baby deer being born, and we see what these ideals of freedom do to a nation like that, right? They're stumbling to stand up. And now the question stands whether these anti-federalists, in the view of recent events, right, in in that scope, are they correct? Were they correct? I think that, as I mentioned earlier, in theory, they were correct. That a too strong central democracy could lead to a tyranny, and that the amount of power that a president could hold would be disastrous, right, or potentially very dangerous. However, I think that the Constitutional Convention had this in mind, and as a result, now that we have a strong central government that operates with three different branches that have parceled out power evenly, and that incentivizes cooperation rather than a a individual state or individual house of the state, fighting for power. And I think that what this means then, in light of these events, is that the nation is deeply divided. It's not the system that is allowing for a individual of any of the branches to have too much power. It's the nation itself that's deeply divided, and as a result, we're seeing these consequences. And it becomes a question of morals played out through this American political scene. And that's my viewpoint on the anti-federalists' argument, is that they had this fear of tyranny. It was justified. However, this fear then allows us to create a strong central government that we now see, but the central government is nothing if not without collaboration, which is what we see is lacking now, as it almost seems forced. Yeah. And that's my answer to question 3. Thank you.